I mentioned, President Trump has blown up our presidential politics, and there's arguably no better example of the new reality we're all grappling with than my next guest. In many ways, Andrew Yang's candidacy is proof of just how vulnerable some Democrats see this president's re-election chances, but also how unpredictable our politics have become and how this contest might become unpredictable. Here we have a businessman, out of nowhere, no prior political or military experience, not only vying to defeat the president, but also getting enough voters to take him seriously that he's made the Democratic debate stage. Well, Mr. Yang joins me now. Andrew Yang, welcome to Meet the Press Daily, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chuck. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let me go with this immediate premise here. Would you be here if Donald Trump hadn't won the presidency?
Categorically not. I'm running to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place, primarily the fact that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Iowa, but I would not be running if Donald Trump were not our president today.
What is it that you think the Democratic Party misunderstood about Trump's appeal 4 years ago?
Well, if you remember, Donald Trump pointed out the devastation and suffering in many American communities.
He
and
wasn't
the Democratic
alone, though.
message.
He wasn't alone. Many Democrats pointed this out. Bernie Sanders pointed this out. Barack Obama pointed it out 4 years earlier. I mean, that's why I only question. He wasn't the only one. He's just the most recent one.
Well, Bernie Sanders definitely pointed out the same thing. But if you remember, the prevailing response was America's already doing great. Americans heard that and did not think that the Democratic Party was truly trying to solve the problems on the ground that many Americans were experiencing. And what happened to the manufacturing workers will now happen to the retail workers, the call center workers, the fast food workers, the truck drivers. We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, and Democrats should be laser focused on addressing that reality rather than focusing on the symptom, which is President Trump.
In some way, though, your signature proposal doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It feels like a Band-Aid. And I say this, your signature proposal, this universal income, and I say a Band-Aid because you're basically trying to fill the gap as we figure out what the jobs of the 21st century look like. Am I being too cynical about it?
Well, if you think what would happen to communities around the country if every American adult got $1,000 a month, it would create more than 2 million new jobs right there in our communities. It would help recognize the kind of work that my wife does every day at home with our 2 boys, one of whom is autistic. So it's not a Band-Aid. It actually supercharges our economy and helps create opportunities in the direction that we need to go, which includes the caring economy, arts, entrepreneurship, creativity, as well as Main Street jobs because of an increase in consumer buying power.
So you think one of the positive aspects about your plan is that if somebody wanted to pursue an art and really couldn't afford to make a living doing it, you're giving them an opportunity to do it. I get that, but how does that grow our economy?
Well, our economy right now is up to a record $20 trillion, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years alone. The problem is that we have these winner-take-all dynamics, that the gains are concentrated just in a handful of industries and companies and individuals. And so if you spread that bounty more broadly throughout the American economy, it does create opportunities, including in the arts, but also in entrepreneurship. And as you know, I'm a serial entrepreneur. We need to have more Americans being put in position to do the kind of work that they actually want to do.
Let's talk about the border. There is a lot of angst and anxiety over the border. The president believes the issue is our asylum laws. Democrats believe that some of this has to do with you can't pull money away from Central America. We've got to have a different sort of tolerance policy here. We have an increase in migration over the border. What would you be doing about it?
Well, the first thing we have to do is put adequate resources to work at the border. We have a shortage of not just asylum judges and facilities, but even Border Patrol personnel. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of unfilled positions because these positions don't pay as competitively as other roles in our government. And also, these are not appealing places to live. So we have to do the work that we know needs to be done in order to have our policies actually be effective on the ground. It serves nobody if there's a multi-month or even year-long waiting process to have an asylum hearing.
I want to go back to your universal income proposal because our debt is already up to $20 trillion. And I know in some ways, if you already get some government assistance, you wouldn't get this money. But how does this not, even in the short term, inflate our debt and put us in a budgetary crisis going forward?
Well, if you look up, Chuck, who are the big winners in this economy? It's Amazon and other trillion-dollar tech companies. And in Amazon's case, they're literally paying zero in federal taxes. So you're 100% right that if you have that situation, it's going to be very difficult.
So are you changing
to
the tax
deficit.
structure? You're going to change the tax structure first before you hand out these checks?
Oh, we do it simultaneously. And the great thing is we'd be taking money from the Amazons of the world, put it directly into the hands of American families and consumers.
Explain how that works. Yeah, I mean, Jeff Bezos going to write you a check?
Oh, you know, we're going to do better than that. We're going to get a toll with every Amazon transaction. We're going to join every other advanced economy in the world and have a value-added tax, which would give the American public a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. That's how we prosper in the 21st century.
And if you're the nominee, I've seen people push either a fair tax or a VAT tax or a national sales tax. And every candidate that has tried to put it out there, if they win a nomination, they get eviscerated because somebody basically shows, hey, look at how much it's going to cost to take your kids back to school now. Look at how much it's going to cost to buy everyday products. How do you beat back, which has been a tried and true method politically to defeat national sales taxes, to defeat the VAT, things like this, where people see the initial bill, and I don't care what kind of refund situation you put in there, that does scare people.
Well, it's more than a refund, Chuck. It's actually a dividend. And for every dollar from the VAT, American consumers would be receiving $3. It would increase the buying power of approximately the bottom 92% of Americans. And Americans understand what $12,000 a year would mean for them and their families. Very, very few Americans consume enough for a mild VAT to come anywhere near counterbalancing a $1,000 dividend a month.
All right, let me go back to a few other issues that you're not as focused, or certainly that we haven't been as focused on. The situation in Iran. How would you try to deal with Iran's belligerent nature in the Middle East? The biggest criticism of President Obama and the Iran nuclear deal was, okay, the good news is you got them to agree on some limits when it comes to the nuclear issue, but it did nothing when it came to them funding terrorist organizations and things like that. What would your administration do to curtail some of that bad behavior by Iran?
Well, I would look to re-enter the nuclear deal. And if you look at it, even after the U.S. pulled out under the Trump administration, there are other countries that signed on that are still there. So we need to de-escalate tensions in the Iran region and make it so that the Iran government's incentives are actually aligned with ours in terms of both de-escalating the nuclear development and hopefully getting them to reduce their funding of terrorist organizations in other parts of the region.
You have a theory of the case on how to deal with the Trump meat grinder? You know, he has a different way of talking to the public, of talking to candidates. Why will you be different at handling the Trump style of political campaign differently than others have tried and failed at?
Well, they say, Chuck, that the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. And I'm already peeling off thousands of Trump supporters, independents, libertarians, conservatives, as well as obviously Democrats and progressives. But I agree with many of your colleagues that we need to be focused on beating Donald Trump, and I'm the ideal candidate for that because I'm focused on solving the problems that got him into office in the first place.
But does that mean taking him on directly, leaving these things, not letting stuff go in unanswered, or is it ignoring some of the antics?
Well, it's about cutting to the heart of the matter and the truth. You know, and I've talked to many people who voted for Donald Trump who recognize that his bluster is not serving them well. It's one reason why many Americans who voted for Donald Trump are looking for a different solution. And I'm happy to say that my campaign is drawing many of those voters over to our side of the aisle.
Why aren't you running for a lower office first and maybe see if you can win and get more people to mainstream your proposals? I just say that, you know, shooting for the presidency, I get it. It is one way, and you're certainly getting more attention than you would if you were running for the U.S. Senate somewhere. But isn't it more practical to try to build this ground up?
Well, Chuck, I dearly wish that I felt like we had the time, but the reality is that robot trucks are 5 to 10 years away from hitting our highways, and driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states around the country. 30% of our malls are closing in the next 4 years because Amazon's sucking up $20 billion in business. So if I took decades to try and climb the political ladder, unfortunately, our economy would be transforming underneath our feet. We just don't have the time for someone to play political gamesmanship.
All right. Andrew Yang. As I said, one of the more unusual candidates that in some ways the Donald Trump era has inspired. We will see you in Miami, sir. Thanks for coming on.
I'll see you in Miami, Chuck. Looking forward to it.
You got it. how many people look at Bernie's supporters and think, there's some supporters I can go grab? You know, if Bernie starts to melt, I do have this theory that anybody that's already left him for Warren's already left him for Warren. They're not going to Warren. They're actually, the two candidates I think that stand to benefit the most if Bernie starts to erode is Biden and Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang.
And it's because of the Reddit world. I mean, the Bernie bros are more likely, I think, to go to Andrew Yang than any other person.
I think that's probably right.
Yeah.
And I think Yang certainly is the candidate that's been most misunderestimated.
Yes, we all
to
have.
use a classic term.
He's outraised.
The other contenders.
There's a lot of senators that he's outraised that we all thought would be in a higher tier.
And it just shows how much of an appetite there is on the left end of the political spectrum for someone who's completely out of the Washington space and who's talking in a different language. I mean, a lot of these senators that are running, you hear they speak in press releases.
They speak Washington.
There's certain, like, you know, phrases and verbs that they use that normal Americans don't use at all.
You mean like appropriate?
Like facilitate, that kind of thing. Yang never talks that way.
Count me skeptical that Bernie Sanders is going to drop out anytime soon.
Oh, I don't believe you.
Because
I'm
remember,
with you there.
in 2016, how furious were Hillary people that he kept hanging on and he kept poking at her, and all of his supporters were not easily just shifted over to her. It was a big problem, and I don't think that anybody should expect that, especially, I'd be very surprised if Andrew Yang outlasts Bernie Sanders.
I got to say this, Andrew Yang is now leading Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Pete Buttigieg amongst black voters in the latest Quinnipiac poll, which is amazing. And it has something to do with the fact that, as we sort of talked about, he's come in with these sort of policy ideas that I think even some of the more liberal progressive candidates have missed. When he talks about automation and AI taking away working class jobs, that matters to working class black folks in South Carolina. When he talked about, he was ahead of the ball game when he talked about paying athletes. And that was something that resonated. So I don't think he's going to be the nominee, but he could benefit from Bernie people.
I do think, look, I'm done underestimating the guy. So now we're going to overestimate him, and then he'll fail to meet expectations. Sorry, Andrew.
He has good lines at debates.
He does have the good lines at debates. Thank you. Yeah.
How do you think this is all going to play out, and what impact is it going to have on the 2020 election?
My new favorite political pundit is Doc Brown from Back to the Future. There's a part where I think it's at the end of the first Back to the Future, he picks them up and they've got to go into the future. And they're like, oh, there's not enough road. And he says, roads, where we're going, there are no roads. That's the way I feel about where we're headed.
Really?
I don't think anybody that tells you they know what's going to happen, give me a break.
Really?
I'll say this. I think if I could make one bet right now, the only bet I'd be comfortable saying in public is I think somebody not named Warren, Sanders, or Biden will finish in the top 3 in Iowa, and that person will be the sort of, that person could be the candidate X that everybody's been wondering, who would be the alternative to Biden if Biden collapsed? Well, the best likely, and here's what I would say, then I would, if somebody finishes third, not named Warren, Biden, or Sanders, I think that person becomes a big deal.
And you don't want to fill in the blank.
Well, no, I think on paper you would say there's 2 candidates best positioned to be that person right now. Pete Buttigieg, financially, and I think he plays well in Iowa. He's one of the, people forget, Iowa Democrats are more religious than average Democrats these days. Democrats as a whole are a little more secular, obviously, than the country as a whole. But in Iowa, many Democrats are still weekly churchgoers. So is Pete. And Pete is comfortable talking about God in ways that you see the other candidates aren't. So I think Pete has a chance to really do better in Iowa because he's built for Iowa. I don't know how Pete gets past South Carolina, but that's another story. But to get out of Iowa, I think Booker has a chance to be that candidate out of Iowa too. He's got a very good campaign of that sort of and the person that is going to, that could be the wild card here, that if Bernie starts to recede, is Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang, wow.
I'm not saying Andrew Yang's going to be a nominee or anything, but Yang, there's a part of the Bernie base and the Yang base that interacts. The people that haven't left Bernie for Warren haven't left Bernie for a reason. I'll let you guys decide what that reason is. They're more likely to go to Biden or Yang than they are to
so
Warren.
you didn't,
So
okay.
what I would say is, I think Yang is somebody that I would not be writing off as total gadfly. He may not be able to win a single primary. If you told me he finished third on caucus night, I wouldn't be floored.
My next guest is someone Democrats have learned they can't ignore him. Andrew Yang is the child of immigrants from Taiwan, an entrepreneur, the creator of a nonprofit, a political gadfly, and most famously an advocate of something called universal basic income, which would give $1,000 a month to every American adult. He has also surprised many by outraising, outpolling, and outlasting a succession of so-called establishment Democratic office holders that have been running for president for years. And unlike many of them, he has already qualified for at least one future debate. Andrew Yang joins me now from Urbandale, Iowa. Mr. Yang, welcome to Meet the Press, sir.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Chuck.
Let me start with something Michael Cruz in Politico wrote about you after following you around. In delivering his alarming, existentially unsettling message of automation and artificial intelligence wreaking havoc on America's economic, emotional, and social well-being, he cracks jokes of his party's presidential contestants. He's the cheerful doomsayer. That's quite an interesting moniker. The optimistic pessimist, I guess, is another way to put it. You accept that description?
I think I'm a hard-eyed realist about what's happening in our economy, Chuck. I'm here in Iowa. They're seeing 30% of their stores and malls close because Amazon is soaking up $20 billion in business every year and paying zero in taxes. We have to create a new way forward and rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us. But that doesn't mean we have to be necessarily very gloomy as we deliver what to me is the most important message of our time. And it's the reason why our campaign is growing and growing while other candidates are dropping out.
You know, 4 years ago, you had a lot of candidates, including Donald Trump, who were talking about bringing jobs back, bringing this back. And you've basically said, he told you this. It's not true. In fact, I think you use it as a way of saying that's why you've won over some former Trump supporters who have now seen it the way you see it on this. Is that really what we need to do, is sort of give up on creating new jobs? I mean, are we going to be in this kind of situation over the next 30 years where we just won't have enough, we have too many people and not enough work?
Well, we're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in our country's history, Chuck, but putting buying power into our hands will build a trickle-up economy and allow us to create hundreds of thousands of jobs here in Iowa and across the country, because that money doesn't disappear. It goes into local businesses and daycare services and car repairs, Little League signups. So this is the way we actually rejuvenate Main Street America, by putting the gains of the 21st century economy into our hands, where it can actually support what's happening in our families and communities every day.
By the way, do you envision this being a permanent entitlement of sorts?
Well, if you look up, there's one state that has had a dividend for almost 40 years,
right,
and that's Alaska. It's the petroleum dividend. And there it decreases income inequality. It makes children and families stronger. It's wildly popular after almost 40 years. And so there's no reason to think it will not be wildly popular throughout the whole country. They pay for it with oil money in Alaska. And what I'm saying to the American people is that technology is the oil of the 21st century.
Let's talk a little bit about the current debate happening inside the Democratic primary. And I think in some ways you have tried to have a little piece of every bit of every lane that there is that we in the media try to create. But let's talk about the specifics of Medicare for all. You're essentially for it, but you haven't talked about how you would pay for it. We know we're having a big debate about how Elizabeth Warren plans to pay for it. But let me ask this basic question. I had a congresswoman, Democratic congresswoman on. If we haven't fully implemented Obamacare, why should we rip it up and start over?
Certainly, I was a fan of the themes of Obamacare, but many Americans agree that it didn't go quite far enough in terms of coverage and allowing Americans to have access to high-quality, affordable care.
How do you know it hasn't been fully implemented? That's always been my question. I've heard this critique before. We don't know. Medicaid has not been expanded in 50 states.
And there's a reason for that. So we need to create a path forward for Americans to have access to care. I would not get rid of private insurance. And to me, the pay for it argument is misplaced because we're already spending 18% of GDP, almost $4 trillion, in large part because the system is not designed to keep us strong and healthy. It's designed to make money for the private insurance companies and the device manufacturers and the drug companies.
Let me ask you about impeachment. You have said you are in favor of this inquiry going forward. But there is a basic question that many voters are going to have. Do you think what the president did is of such an egregious act that he shouldn't be on the ballot in 2020?
I agree with the panel discussion that you just had. I am for impeachment, but the fact is when we're talking about Donald Trump, we are not presenting a new way forward and a positive vision for the country that Americans will get excited about. That's the only way we're going to win in 2020, and that's the only way we're going to start actually solving the problems that got him elected. Even when we're talking about impeaching Donald Trump, we're talking about Donald Trump, and we are losing.
And yet you talk about Donald Trump quite a bit in your rallies because you seem to want to appeal to former Donald Trump supporters.
Well, if you listen to my rally speech, Chuck, the vast majority of it is just about the challenges that Americans are experiencing every single day. These challenges preceded Donald Trump. They will still be with us after Donald Trump is out of office. And if we don't get to work solving these problems, then we're just going to be trapped in this endless food fight. And the American people deserve much, much better.
Let me ask you one question that has to do with your own identity in this country. And this was a criticism written about you having to do with something you said during the last debate. Frank Xiang writes the following in the LA Times. Seeing Yang up on the Democratic primary debate stage should have been a thrilling milestone for me as a fellow Taiwanese American. But when I heard him use model minority stereotypes to describe himself, it was hard to feel proud. He still felt that the most practical use of his identity on a national stage was as a joke. You've had quite a few Asian American columnists write critiques of this, bothered by this a bit. What do you say to that criticism?
I am very proud of my heritage, and I'm very proud of being the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat. And I think Americans are smart enough and savvy enough to know a joke when they hear it. I think that dragging some of these myths into the light actually makes them less powerful and helps dispel them.
Has it bothered you that it is a track that I noticed earlier this week you've had to push back on this idea? I guess some white supremacists started saying nice things about your candidacy. Due to the political incorrectness, I guess you want to call it that, you push back hard on that. Does it bother you that that group of voters seems attracted to your candidacy?
Well, I've completely disavowed any sort of support from anyone who has those kinds of ideas. I mean, I'm the son of immigrants myself. But to me, we have to solve the real problems of this time, and attacking each other for poor word choice or things that are of marginal importance to the American people unfortunately takes our focus away from the real problems on the ground that got Donald Trump elected.
Andrew Yang, entrepreneur. Again, you have taken this Democratic primary and made a lot of people take you a lot more seriously than they had planned to. Andrew Yang, stay safe on the trail, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Chuck. The Yang Gang is just going to continue to grow. We'll see you soon.
We'll be watching.